Well, that is a motivation, but I would say it's not the main motivation for most people. The
Right.
taxes, exactly.
My experience is that, especially if people that get older in life, they don't want to have to deal with owning an asset like that, but they still want or need a return on their money.
So it's the management issues, the time, the hassle.
Sometimes
It's
that
a big deal.
overrides the tax consequences. They're willing to pay the tax on
Right.
that asset because they don't have to manage it.
Exactly. I had a phone call this morning with a planner who is asking me to do illustrations for him, and it was exactly that. It's an 82-year-old that said he's got 7 properties, and he's tired of doing the management, tired of being responsible for those issues that come up, whether it's repair or client or renter issues or whatever. So it's the management part of it is a big, big motivation. In my world, it's avoiding the capital gains tax on the sale is the #1 motivation. There's so many times, and this is where you're going to hear this, and we're going to talk a little bit later of some of the questions to ask, but the main thing to listen for is the client that says, I would sell, I want to sell, or I need to sell, or like to sell, but I really don't want to pay the capital gains tax. And of course, in California, it's what, 13% as the top rate, besides the federal and the Obamacare, the Medicare tax. So, I mean, you could be in a 35 to 40% tax rate on the gain. And that's what that comes to a screeching halt, that they won't go forward because they don't want to pay that tax. So we're looking for the solution today on the difference. So this is a generic view of the charitable remainder trust. And there's several kinds of charitable remainder trusts, and we're not going to go into that kind of detail today, because what we want to accomplish today is listening for people that are either already doing 1031s or considering that, but really don't want to go that direction because they want to get off the treadmill and get maybe even some cash out. And we're going to look at that today too, of how are they going to get cash out and not just do another deferral type of situation. So the basic concept for the charitable remainder trust is the client puts assets into the trust. It is its own tax entity. It's a charitable exempt entity, and they will sell that inside the charitable trust as your second box, get lifetime income or a term of years, depending on how old they are and what they're looking for. At the end of their life, or at the end of the term, the remainder, that's why it's called a remainder trust, the remainder goes to charity or charities. They can change that during their lifetime if they reserve the right to change to charity. So that's our general basic concept. Any questions there first? Okay. Then let's put some numbers on that. So the charitable remainder trust for 2 folks that are 71 and 70 we look down at our bottom left corner, and the tax deduction for those ages and a 5% pay-up is $209,000. So not only do they avoid the capital gains tax on that $400,000 gain, they also get an income tax deduction. So they get a double dip there on the tax benefits. So those 2 things is what I see typically is what drives why they're doing the charitable remainder trust. Lifetime income, that could be a growing income, because the way the unit trust works, it's the percentage times whatever amount is in the trust each year. Meaning that if the trust value grew, their payment would grow. So if in 10 years that trust was $1 million instead of $500,000, now it's 5% on $1 million, or $50,000 instead of $25,000. So it changes every year based on the value of the trust times that percentage. Who can tell me what the minimum payout rate is required or is allowed by IRS. The IRS has a floor. What's the minimum payout rate? 5%. It has to be at least 5%. It can be high as, anybody know what the maximum could be?
10?
Higher, higher,
16.
higher. 50% could be by law. Now, why would somebody want to do a 50% trust and destroy it in 2 or 3 years? So, we did one last year for somebody that was a 20% payout, but they are in their late 80s. So their life expectancy wasn't that many years. And they wanted the income back out, and it was not as big a charitable deduction as they could have gotten, but it was still pretty substantial for that age. So there's 3 things that we look at when we do these calculations and analysis. It's the payout rate, what income do they want, what charitable deduction do they want, and then how long is it going to go? Is it for their lifetime? Because you can have it for a term of years. You could have a 5-year trust, or you could have a 20-year trust. Most of the time we see 1 life or 2 life, meaning husband and wife is a 2 life, or just an individual. That's 90% of the trust out there is for somebody's lifetime. Now, what about the kids? Who can tell me some solutions for, what if there's children involved in this family? Because remember, at the end, it goes to charity. It doesn't go to the family. The balance of the trust goes to the charity that they've named. What are some solutions for that?
Life insurance policy.
You could do a replacement life insurance policy. We call it a second to die policy. So that it's on both husband and wife, and when the second one dies, then that money goes to the kids outside of this whole structure. What if they're non-insurable? Then we want to do what we call a term of years addition to the trust. So you could have a 2 life like this, and when mom and dad both died, you could continue another up to 20 years to the kids if they're old enough. So it's a calculation. See this number here, this charitable deduction calculation up front has to be at least 10% of what you put in. So see, that number would have to be at least $50,000 to qualify as a charitable trust. And so that's what we do quite often is we back into if there are children in that situation and they want to include the kids, we'll include a term of years of maybe 5 to 10 years so the kids get some income out of that. But after all, it's the upfront benefits to the parents that's important. Yeah, the kids' inheritance might be important, but avoiding the capital gains tax on the sale today, that's the most important to the owner. Because why? Because they're trying to diversify that, they're trying to get off that treadmill. Okay, and then we move forward. What about this one? We call it a sale and unit trust. That's because a lot of folks that have businesses as well as large piece of real estate, they want some money out of it. They don't want to go from one tied up situation to another 100% in an irrevocable trust, because that's what these are, irrevocable trusts. So we will do the calculation to see how much, well, we kind of back into how much money do the people want out in liquidity, what cash check do they want, and we can do that calculation. This one is an example of a $5 million property and they want $1 million out. They want to have that liquidity for other reasons, maybe start another business, buy a property. So you don't have to put all in. And I've discovered that if you enter that conversation on all or nothing type of mentality, you probably get nothing. Meaning that the client will walk away because they want some liquidity out of this large asset. So the deduction for the charitable trust will help offset the cash portion that they get out. See, they'll have to pay tax on the cash portion that they get out. So what's very common I see is about a 60-40 split, meaning 60% in the charitable trust and about 40% cash out. Because that deduction, most of the time, depending on the cost basis, the deduction most of the time will wash out the tax on the cash portion. So that's just a good way to look at helping your client get some cash out. Because like in 1031 exchange, that just rolls forward. They don't get cash out. They just get a different property. This is a way to get some cash out, but still avoid tax on part of it. Just some numbers. With these ages, $1.5 million charitable deduction on a $4 million trust. Well, that deduction is more than they need on the $1 million. And so that's why we kind of work both ends against the middle, where you end up starting with something like this, and then maybe you'll move to a $2 million cash and a $3 million charitable trust, and see how much deduction that creates to offset the cash portion. So it is a way to get cash out, but still not pay the huge amount of tax. Okay, now look at your paper, and the print's a little small for this slide. These are, I wanted to do this so that you can walk away with an example of the kinds of questions that you should be asking if you're an advisor of your clients. Is there debt on the property? Why is this important? This is going to be a little discussion time here. Why is that important to ask that question? I know Cloyd knows the answer, so I'm going to call on you first. Why do we need to know if there's debt on the property?
Because if there's debt on the property, it can't go directly into the trust.
Right. Yeah, it's a big tax problem. It's, technically it's unrelated business taxable income is the reason, but the point is it blows up the trust from the planning point of view. So you don't want to have property that has debt on it. Okay, second question, is there a binding agreement in place? Why is that important? Because IRS says if you already have an agreement, you already incurred the tax before it went into the trust. So the trust has to be the seller, not the individual. So it's deeded into the trust first. The trustee of the trust is the seller. Otherwise, IRS calls that a prearranged sale. And you won't avoid the tax. What is the approximate cost basis? That's just to calculate on what kind of tax savings we're going to have. Is there really a problem? Sometimes people will come to me and they'll say, oh, my client needs a charitable remainder trust. And I say, what's the cost basis on that $1 million property? $950,000. Well, you're probably not going to do charitable remainder trust because you're not avoiding the tax and that much tax. And the client's going to say, why am I tying this up in an irrevocable trust when I don't have much tax to pay? I have one case right now where the client has a condo. It's worth about $100,000. I said, what did you pay for it? $91,000. I said, sell it. And if you really want to still do charitable trust for the deduction and the charity portion, that that you really want to include your charity, put cash in after the sale. And because if you have a loss on that sale, then you can take the loss against personal income and you don't have the deduction in the charitable trust. Okay, then the next question, what is the approximate net income? Why is that important? Because you want to show them that they actually are increasing their income from this kind of plan. If somebody's benefiting at a 10% rate of return on wherever their money is now, they're going to go backwards, and that could be a discussion problem.
Question related to the debt on the property. If I remember correctly, I heard that if there's a small amount of debt, there's a workaround. Is that the receiving charity having to then figure out how to pay it off, looking at the collective benefit?
Yeah, essentially, if there's a little bit of debt, the workarounds are there are 2 or 3 kinds of things, but you're kind of getting to the same place every time, and that is paying it off. either the client pays it off with their own other money, or they can move the debt to another property if the lender allows that. Or sometimes you can partner with a charity. Let's say there's 10% debt on the property. You could deed 10% to the charity on a sale, so they're buying 10%. You use that money, pay off the debt, and then when the property sells, there's 90% owned by the trust and 10% owned by the charity. They get their money back at the sale. But charities won't do that unless they're also the irrevocable beneficiary on the trust side, because that's what's in it for them.
And sometimes your property, you might have a multi-parcel property where all the debt can be moved to one parcel.
Right.
And you could,
Right, yeah, Dennis and I looked at a property the other day that has 4 parcels, so it looks like one, I mean, it's one owner,
right.
looks like one entity, but we looked at, wait a minute, there's 4 deeded properties in this entity, so they can move the debt onto the, half, 2 of them, or whatever the bank would want, or whoever the lender is. It's way easier if it's an individual lender, like a carryback loan from the previous sale or something. Okay,
Randy?
yeah.
What happens if you have 3 owners on a property?
Depends on how the ownership is the entity. For example, if it's an LLC, one person that wants to do the trust and the other 2 that don't, that person can put their partnership units, depending again on the partnership agreement as well. It's a little more of a legal question for these guys, but you actually, depending on the entity, could probably put your portion in and the other people do not have to do it, and then you just have one buyer and 2 or 3 sellers.
So you just track it like with their social security number or something like that?
Yeah, because what would happen is the person that wants to do the trust, they would deed their portion in. Again, it depends on their agreement, because sometimes you can't do that. The partnership agreement won't allow you to transfer your share without their agreement. So most of the time you can figure out a way that they deed their own part, and then the other people, they're just going to get their cash and pay the tax on it. Yeah, so there are ways to do that. Number 5, are there obvious environmental issues? Okay, what's the big deal about that? It could be a big deal. I was just talking to a planner yesterday who his client had a property that had a dry cleaner on it. Okay, so they were going to put it in a charitable trust, and they hadn't got around to that, and they were getting ready to sell it, and then they figured out that there had been a lot of chemicals that had gotten put into the sewer, and it leached into the aquifer, and now there's this is in upstate New York, I don't know if you've heard about this one, where there's like a $1 billion lawsuit or claim or whatever that is against the U.S. government, who had most of the property and had most of the defense contractor issues of how that happened, and had a big environmental problem of their chemicals going into the aquifer. Well, they're the majority of the problem, but this guy who has this one dinky little piece of the problem, under the, what do they call it, CERCLA laws, the environmental rules where they can come back and claim against you, it's joint and several, meaning that everybody is responsible for everything. So now that guy gets pulled into $1 billion problem for his one little piece of property. That's called an environmental problem. So, call a mess. Or even, John, when you're doing appraising and you say, okay, there's this property, we want to put it in a charitable trust, it used to have a gas station on it. And you've got to disclose that there's probably tanks still buried there, or were they dug out? So that ends up being an issue based on the actual property that goes in. That ends up, a lot of times people will want to do the charitable trust because it takes and be their own trustee rather than giving that property to the charity directly, because that keeps the charity out of the chain of title that way. So you can actually use a charitable trust to kind of wash the property, you know, get it sold before there's environmental issues that could be a problem to the charity. Okay. Who owns the property? Business entity is kind of like your question, Gene. Is it sole ownership? Is it a partnership? Is it an LLC? Is it a sub-S? Is it a C Corp? Who owns that property? Is it individually owned? Is my son on the title with me? You know, there's all kinds of issues. You have to make sure that whoever's transferring it to the charitable trust has the capacity and it really is theirs to transfer. Okay, what other assets do they have? Why is that important? And I'm talking about the property owner now, who is going to put something in a charitable trust. Why is it important for you, the advisor, to ask that question? Anybody? None of that. Well, that's part of it. If they are doing a split thing and they actually have tax to pay on part of it because they didn't put all of it in the charitable trust, that's one. Lloyd?
Lifestyle issues, do they have enough other income and resources that they can afford to tie this up
Yeah,
irrevocably?
because it's an irrevocable trust. Do they have liquidity in case they have to have long-term care, or even, you know, change their lifestyle? You know, they're used to doing a lot of traveling. Can't do that anymore because they don't have the cash flow. So yeah, that's really the issue. It's kind of a due diligence situation. Can they really afford to tie it up in an irrevocable trust? Does the owner have children? We've talked about that a little bit, because that's a replacement insurance thing, or including them in a term of years. Or, I had another call today, a planner said, I have a client that has multiple properties. She's 53 years old, single, divorced. She has an adult child, I'm guessing in their 20s, but is doing really well, and I'm not planning on leaving anything to him. Like, he's doing better than she is. And so sometimes it works that way, and I've run into that quite often, especially with older clients, where they say, my kids have way more than I do, and it's really not that important to worry about what's in it for the kids, because they're past that. Okay, is the property readily marketable? Jim, that's probably an issue that you ask almost up front, because if we're going to put this in this charitable trust, somebody's still going to pay the property taxes, which is the trust. So is there a cash flow to pay that? How long is that going to sit there? We've had them where we do administration where somebody thought it was going to sell right away, and it didn't. Years later, they're still getting an appraisal on the property for the valuation each year. So if it's not super marketable, you know, really consider whether that's the right asset to go into charitable trust. The only reason why you wouldn't worry about that is if somebody was putting that in either because they wanted the charity to actually get that property, which is a good reason, or it is a property that is good cash flow already, which is, you know, it's already good leases, good rental property, and that income is what they're comfortable with. They don't want to go into the stock market. They don't want it to be sold. They want that income to flow through from the rental to them in their payment. And then you don't sell the property at all. But if you're planning to sell it right away, you have to ask that marketability question. What leases do they have on the property now? Why? Because that's a legal contract that's going to continue. You can't just say, oh, go away because we transferred it to our charitable trust. You know, you're going to have to honor those leases. You want to know all of the restrictions and conditions and all of that in order to make sure you can sell it for top dollar for this client. Any more questions? Any other things that you think that you would ask your client?
Randy, what if you have three parties that inherit property, kids, they all want to sell, one of them decides to do the charitable gain trust, let's just say, no, we don't want to do it.
Right.
Property gets sold, and then suddenly the other two, or one of the other two goes, oops, I wish I had that.
Yeah.
change their mind.
Well,
All
I've
of a
seen
sudden-
that in real estate, I've seen it in businesses, and that's where, you know, we've had some sessions in the past where we talk about the charitable remainder trust that says it's income for life to the donor, and then at the end it goes to charity. Okay, that's what we're talking about, charitable remainder trust. Charitable lead trust, and I'm just throw that in because it's something that you're gonna probably run into, is the opposite, where it says income to charity first, and at the end of the term of years, it goes back to the family or the individual donor. That's called a grantor trust, if it goes back to the individual donor. And that's what we use when you have the oops situation. The client said, I sold my business. We did 3 of these last year. The client had this situation and they wanted income tax deduction against that problem. They sold real estate and went, oh my goodness, I should have done that. So now they need an income tax deduction, and they do the other kind of trust for that. But once you've sold it, you're out of the game for a charitable remainder trust. You can do it with cash, but it usually doesn't work out all that great because you've already incurred the tax, and then you're using your deduction against that tax, and it usually doesn't wash out. Okay, good.
Manny, I mentioned asset protection as one of the negatives. How does this help asset protection?
Asset protection for the trust value itself, the income stream potentially can get attached in a lawsuit. So it's sort of a half benefit. So somebody, if you're in a lawsuit and they saw you had an income stream from a charitable trust, that could be attached for a lawsuit claim, but not the principal itself, because that's in the irrevocable trust earmarked for charity.
I have a client whose husband died, and he and 2 other partners own a $30 million building. And now they all decided to sell. They want the administration, pass on their own. And so she's about to receive $10 million, then she has to pay tax. Now, if the building has not completed the escrow and not sold yet, is that the time?
It's already in escrow,
Yeah.
it's too late. They already have a binding agreement, yeah. Then you start talking about the lead trust as the other alternative.
So it's, excuse me,
Was it community property?
I don't know.
She can step up in
Just
basis
step up.
at the first death,
3 partners, they're not related.
but then her portion,
Or Sharon has to step up. with-
her third
Yeah,
gets
her third
step
step
up.
up.
Yeah,
Perfect.
yeah.
Still do the trust though.
Then you can do the trust, and you don't have a tax, but you get a tax deduction
Trust.
for setting it up.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what's so interesting when you have to step up in basis, and we'll see if that's gonna continue with a new administration that potentially could go away. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Can you explain the difference between a charitable remainder and a family foundation?
Charitable remainder trust is an entity that you retain a lifetime income for. So you're getting something out of it. You're getting income from the trust. And the money doesn't go to charity until you pass away, way down at the end. So charity's not involved at all until the trust is over. The whole thing is set up for lifetime income for you. The family foundation is like, it's completely given away to charity, and then it gradually gives out to other charities, grants, or whatever. But it's 100% given away. You don't personally get any income from it. It's not set up for you to get income. It's set up to eventually 100% go to charity, that you can make payments out of charity, you know, during the life of the private foundation. So one is for income for you, the other is 100% given away.
Can't you pay for a wedding? Clinton said that time.
Depends on who you are, I guess.
College tuition?
You have one coming up?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, this next thing is the elephant in the room. The lady wants to bring $8 billion to America. She's an American citizen, has an American social security number, she's married to a CIA agent, she's part of the royal family, or was part of the royal family in Vietnam. So she brings the money over, and we've already made arrangements where the money's going, and I told her we can't even talk to her. I told her representative, we can't talk until she actually gets the money in the bank here in America, and the money is then proven to be legitimate, then I can handle it. But what kind of, and she wants a charitable trust. She didn't say charitable trust, they said family trust. It's not really a family trust, most families call it, but it's a trust for charity. They like to set up churches in Vietnam and things of that nature. So what's the best way for that money to go into a charitable type of trust?
Right. Well,
She doesn't need the money, so she wants the money to go out to charity.
That's what I was gonna ask,
I
if you,
need it.
yeah, Donald, if it's totally charitable, like what they call a pure charitable trust, that's different than what we're talking about here. If she wants any income from it at all, then a charitable trust is a good idea. If it's a pure, then you're really probably talking about private foundation. Because it's 100% charity purpose. Do you guys have any other comments on that?
Does she need a deduction, or do they need charitable, tax deductions?
Well, I guess there's gonna be a tax on the money she brings into the United States.
Yeah, because then a
She's
lead,
bringing the first deposit, 600 million from European money.
okay,
And then after that, she'll start rolling it in.
Yeah,
So
it-
we'll get a team.
then a lead
But
trust
you
grant
get a
money?
charitable deduction for a private foundation for that donation anyway. But a lead trust potentially is useful where you get the deduction up front, the money goes to charity for a term of years, and then the family gets the principal back later. That would be worth talking about if she wants to benefit her heirs in any way. with that.
My understanding, she doesn't have any children.
Pure charitable.
Anybody for Donald?
You wanna, come on up, Dennis is gonna then come up and Jim is gonna have a little discussion now.
We have time at the end, if you have any more questions for Randy, we'll include that. I'm going to bring Jim Martindale up. I want to say a couple things. First of all, a couple quick other introductions. This is Tamara Bringhurst, who's part of my office in advancement. This is Paul Rodriguez. He's a realtor at Southland Properties. For how many years now, Paul? 18. Yeah, long time. And you're a student, any of you? Yes, I am. Well, welcome. I know the session technically on the Combat Learning didn't start till 1:15. We actually started 12:45. I didn't have a way to advertise that, but I knew there might be a student or two pop in. So, maybe. What's your name? Aaron, thank you. What's your name? That's very good. So hopefully you can catch the rest of the first part of what you missed. If you have any questions after the answer. Jim Martindale, you have his information on the end of your the presentation. Been a commercial broker in North San Diego Valley for 40 years, right? So I learned more again when I came to APU about this Past Connection Association. Before I came, there was sort of another, maybe a prior iteration of some sort of network that APU Plan Getting Department had with a handful of advisors in the community. Jim was one of those, where they talked about these kinds of trusts. Now, APU has done charitable major trusts for many years. The gentleman and I have sort of stepped into some of his shoes. Hank Boda has set them up for a number of years. So, as you can tell, a charity doesn't benefit by these until when? The very end, right? Many, many years down the road. So, I'm planting seeds for someone else, most likely, to see the fruit, right? But I'm getting to see the fruit of some of the things that Hank has set up in years past, which is a real joy to me. But in the past, it was kind of a traditional model of a charity where we share this with our own network of people and maybe a few times outside the network. We typically serve as trustee because every trust has a trustee, the income beneficiary, who is usually the donor, or the donor standard, and then you have the remainder beneficiary, which is the charity or charities, right? So the trustee can be one of the three people probably. Who typically is trustee of the trust? The trustor themselves, right, the donor, which is what Randy has talked about. The charity can be the trustee. Are there professional trustees? Sure, or you can hire a professional trustee, which is probably the most expensive option. Usually if the charity does it, they'll oftentimes do it for free or discounted because they're one of the remainder beneficiary, right? That's part of the benefit in some people's mind. However, as I've been working with Randy and developing this network, we are talking to you advisors as you talk to clients and saying, your client can be their own trustee. You know, it doesn't need to be the charity, it doesn't need to be someone else. And then the decisions on asset management and all those kinds of things can happen within their own advisory network. Yes, the trustees, we trust that we are trustees that we manage or managed by our business office, but we are interested and open to and seeing more happen that can be outside of our management. We'll always be available to do it, but the idea and the concept is first and foremost that maybe your own client will be the trustee and you will advise them along the path as whatever piece of the puzzle you have. So in the past, Jim brought 2 or 3 people to APU, clients that he had worked with said, hey, maybe you should think about this idea that I heard about from Azusa Pacific. And so let's talk through 1 or 2 of those cases, because I'm familiar a little bit with one more than the other, but one was
Farquhar.
Right?
Yeah, gentleman who owned it for quite some time. He had it wasn't being managed properly because he wasn't the manager. That wasn't what he did. And so he went through some frustration. We talked about selling it, and obviously he had tax consequences. We talked about the 1031. He said, I really don't want to get into more real estate. I want to have real estate. And so even though he didn't have a charitable nature to him, what he did do, because he had about a $4 million adjusted gross income per year, so he's paying a lot of taxes. And so when we got the property into charitable remainder trust, he got back all of these taxes. So that was really the kind of the score for him is, man, I already lost this money to the government, and when he filed this, he got that money back. So that was a huge plus to him. And the charity was just, it was kind of neat because APU named the property after him. And in this case, they did not sell it right away. They did have an income stream. They managed it for a while. But because it went up in value, his income went up as well. And then it was a 20-year, I believe.
Yeah, it's a 20-year trust. It actually ends this year. Yeah, later this year. So, yeah, APU, and again, back then we had a larger asset management office, and that was kind of one of the benefits. We said, well, we can manage it until strategic time to sell it and all that kind of stuff. And so in that case, it's one of the shining examples where they held it for a while, and it went up in value, and so when it's sold, his income jumps even more. So he's been really happy. I joined Hank in meeting with him a couple times a year, and his charitable intent is still like, we talk about what's going on at the school, and he's like, don't tell me about those kids serving in Africa. I don't really.
He's a crusty guy.
But he said more than once, this is one of the best financial investments I ever made, actually, because of he understood the taxes and all that. And nearly did another one with us, if not for kids that I think saw, maybe that I'm not going to benefit by that down the road. But
Yeah, but it's amazing. It's been almost 20 years. He's completely happy because it hasn't lamented it at all.
you had another unique situation I don't know as much about.
Was that Bauman?
Precision.
Yeah, Precision. That was kind of an interesting one. It was a drilling and engineering company, and what we did was they couldn't sell it because they had, well, actually they had a lot of liability, product liability, because it was a corporation. But APU took that, including the liability, created some, I think it was an LLC, existence then, sells from that, and again they sold the corporation to APU, or did a charitable remainder trust. And then we eventually sold that to another investor immediately, actually, who took over that LLC. So it's a little complicated, but that was a fun deal. And they, once again, very happy. And they couldn't have done it before because it was a corporation that owned the property. So there would be some complications. And APU really stepped up and played on that one. And it was it was a fun deal. It wasn't a regular sale because it was a property within a corporation, so you had to sell the corporation.
So did they know this other buyer was interested?
Yes.
Okay, so we call that a buyer waiting in the wings. Randy talked about, you can't have a contract of sale, but you can have a buyer waiting in the wings that you're fairly confident is going to buy it. In fact, we had a case like this year, someone that had been to one of our seminars years ago, who came back to us 2 years ago. They have multiple properties in Nevada. They sold a property downtown LA, that's what they came first to look at, but they ended up doing a 1031 exchange into 8 little rentals in Henderson, Nevada. Well, they came back 2-3 years ago and said, I think we're ready to start exiting these things. We're getting in our late 80s and we don't like the management. So they put one of those in a trust with us 2 years ago. And we kept touch base and they said, we may do 1 or 2, we're going to sell a couple, but we may do a couple trusts. Another good idea is to do a trust in the same year you're selling one, so you're taking the tax deduction off one and offsetting the other, right? So they called me up, we met with them in November, because it was last year, and they said, well, we may get back in touch with you before the end of the year. And I got a call a couple weeks later, we have one of our properties over there is vacant, and we were planning on calling you and maybe putting in the trust, but we told our property manager over there, and if you find a buyer, you can advertise it for a month until we get ready to do something else. And he's just called us, he's got a buyer who's interested, they're willing to pay the price we're happy with. They want to pay cash and close quick. We're probably too late, right? I said, well, maybe not. So we talked through it. They hadn't signed anything, they've gotten an offer, they hadn't signed it, so they said, well, I said, it would really benefit you if you do this now rather than after the fact. And they understood that as we talked about it. So I said, I'm happy to talk with the parties involved. So they had me talk to the property manager, who was sort of an agent on the side, explained to him, he understood it, talked to the buyer's agent, and they understood it. They had to wait about a week. We quickly transferred the property into their existing charitable trust, which you can add to this kind of trust. Deeded it into the trust, turned around and told them, okay, now it's available. They rewrote their offer, and we went. So we ended up actually closing it before the year end. So you can have a buyer waiting in the wings. There's a risk, of course, that it might fall through, but that's always a risk.
Another one, Dennis, this is another fun deal that we're working on right now. There's a dealership. Dealership has closed since, and the land is now developable for a apartment building and sort of thing. But it's got 6 different parcels. So what we're going to do is divvy those up, attach the aggregate value and then the individual values, and then we'll do a charitable remainder trust on this part, 1031 on this part, maybe do a installment sale on this part, so we can kind of divvy it up a little bit. That's fun too.
That's a great thing. So again, sort of a new day from us in our department. We want to try and work with you and help you. I've had planners that have met with us. All right, I get what you're doing, but what's in it for you, the charity? I mean, how do and what we're trying to say is, look, don't lead with the charitable part of it. There is a charitable component, but we think there's enough tax and income and other benefits in this to share the idea with your client, and the charitable part can come later. So I always say, I'm happy to be part of the conversation. We've got a couple people who have invited me to sit down with Randy, or just call Randy. He's kind of a neutral third party. He can start the conversation, and at some point, we may be able to help with something, might be able to help with the cost of preparing documents, or help with something that is a cost to the client if we're included in the plan in some form or fashion. But first and foremost, we want to see this idea help you with your clients, help you inspire your clients to appreciate the idea that you bring to the table, and maybe generate potentially new businesses. They refer people to you and so forth. But I also I enjoy seeing. It's a shame that I think there's a lot of charitable money that gets missed. That really is just a replacement of what we're doing around the government. Yes, it could go to charities that the client might be interested in, or even if they're not, you can create charitable intent. Sometimes after the fact, we found people that did it for just this much charitable reasons and that much for the tax reasons, but later they start to like the fact that they're also becoming a philanthropist too. So I think that's a fun thing.
So this charitable trust is set up, it's our client, we still maintain the ability to do management on that?
You can,
Those
yes.
assets,
Right.
that gets written into the trust?
Well, if your client's the trustee, then he chooses who manages the assets. So I assume if you're doing an idea to him, opinion, ask you to do that. And Randy's rule, all these trusts have to have a very specific tax return done. And I know some CPAs try and tackle that, but from what I've heard from the ones I've talked to, they're better off not. Randy just does that part of it, so that's his specialty, and that's why he works all around the country helping financial planners, CPAs, and attorneys, state attorneys put these together. So he's an expert in those areas. Any other questions? Thank you, Jim. Any questions for Randy?
Good.
All right, well, we'll be around after if you have specific deeper dives, but I appreciate you coming, and we'll try and have a couple new kind of things a year, and have a great day. Thanks again. And again, if you get a ticket, picture, text it to me, if you've got your cell phone, it should be on there.
All right.
And, okay, good, that's right.
So he said it's
I spoke with the lawyer that
That's what I thought.
the amendment. Had a very good conversation. Yeah, and 1 o'clock we had a phone conference set up by Vince, but I said, well, I went over my concerns. I had to go over my concerns. After I talked to him, I was very well, that's what, it's the 11th. They've had that building. I've been in there for years. So, no, they don't have to have it, and he sent me all of it. So we looked at them all. Yeah, so that'll be fun. So this is what I learned today. On the 1031, interesting thing, sent a couple of them, I thought it would be a like property, saying you That's what I thought. But the other thing that gave me good insight on the 1031 is that the depreciation thing, that's a good tool on that. I never thought of it as that.
Letter just says, just call the number.